All right. Well, welcome everyone. I know the attendees are starting to come in. We're going to give it one more minute before we go ahead and get started. So hold tight, and we'll get going momentarily. All right, ladies, do we think we're ready?
I think so.
I think so. I think we can get rolling. I'm sure people will join us as they get off of their 3 o'clock meetings or 3:30 meetings. Right?
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Again, this is from WTF to FTW, turning the page to accelerate product practices in 2021. We're thrilled to have you all here on our webinar. My name's Joe Ruekert. I'm a co-founder of Fahren, and a little bit more about that here in a minute. But we are going to get started on our event, our October product event. This, for those of you that are new, or maybe this is your first one that you've attended of our Fahren series, this is a part of our Business Drivers event series. And so we're very proud to have a couple great panelists here. I'll introduce them in a minute. Just a few administrative notes before we go ahead and get started. Q&A, we'll be taking Q&A throughout the session, and we'll be answering questions that we get towards the end here later in the hour. We're also going to be recording this session, so look for this on hellofahren.com and our YouTube channel in the next few days. We'll get those posted, and you'll be able to send those out and see the recording. Lastly, we'll be doing a few polls, so we'll kick into a poll here in a second. But I wanted to start us off and introduce our panelists. And no one will argue that 2020 has been just a doozy of a year. We know this is having incredible impact on our product leaders and our teams, and we're really looking to have a fresh start going into 2021. So I am pleased to announce two incredible speakers. I've got Jen Swanson and Geri Huibregtse with me. Geri is the Director of Product at Dispatch, one of our favorite companies here in Minneapolis. Dispatch is a business-to-business delivery product company located, again, here in the Twin Cities. She's got a rich background in digital product management, consulting, and expertise in building and leading successful teams and processes and client relationships in high-growth tech spaces. Geri, great to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our other panelist is Jen Swanson. Jen is an independent consultant at Jen Swanson Consulting and is also a principal consultant with us here at Fahren. Jen focuses on digital transformation and helping product teams to scale and excel in bringing valuable digital experiences to life. Her clients include General Mills, TCF, Dispatch, and the Star Tribune. So both of you, it's such a pleasure to have you two here. Before we dive into our first topic, folks on the phone or on the webinar, we're actually going to launch our first poll right now. We would love to hear. It's always interesting to see who's on the meeting here with us today. So the first one, we'd just love to see what's your primary role, whether it be a product leader, a product manager, owner, marketing or technology leader, entrepreneur, or other. So welcome. And 1 second, there we go.
There's our faces.
There's the faces, exactly. Jen, Geri, and Joe. That's just so lovely. So we'll share the results of that poll here in just a second. But ladies, let's kick it off. You know, what a year has it been? It's hard to believe that we've now been under kind of the current situation in the pandemic for 9 months now, or going on 9 months. I don't even know how that's possible, but we've been talking to a lot of people at Fahren, and it's been incredibly diverse in terms of the responses that we've gotten about how they're handling it, how their teams are navigating these situations, and really what is changing with collaboration and how teams are working. And I'd love to hear from you two. Now that we're 9 months into this situation, what are you guys hearing and seeing, either from your own teams or Jen, in your case, from your clients? And Geri, maybe I'll start with you, if you wouldn't mind. How has the last 9 months been, and how has that impacted your product teams and your growth strategies and everything else under the sun? What has it been like living through this?
Yeah. Well, I guess our team has both, we've done lots of hiring without ever meeting people in person, except for at like an outside happy hour that was coordinated. We've just, I would say that initially the transition was actually quite, I don't want to say super easy, but you know, people were very familiar with collaborating online. And so in that way, we sort of like very quickly transitioned, and we had to get something, we had to actually respond and kick something out very quickly, and did so in about the first 2 weeks of all being at home. And that worked out well. I think just over time though, it's been more fatigue, and you know, and frankly got more intense later in the summer, and more so now when I got together with team members who are all very, very new, and we were just talking about what's going on in the world, and just how that's impacting our work. After that workshop, I just had a lot of thank yous about even just acknowledging that that's the state of things. So I think it's just really important. Like we're obviously all trying to do the best we can to deliver as much as possible, and you know, live our lives day by day. And you know, I'm thrilled myself that I no longer have, you know, kids that I don't have to 100% care for and do my job. And then it was like summer was a relief with like a sitter, and now it's like another transition into some distance learning and other things. So it's just been like this. It sort of hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
that's exactly what I was just going to say. It feels like it's a never ending, like you're on the roller coaster forever, right? You just keep going around and around, up and down, and you kind of can tell sometimes when it's coming and that sort of thing. I've seen that with a lot of clients too, where they're, you know, at first it was the newness of, okay, we're all remote. We know how to do this because we've had remote teams before, or, you know, a couple people didn't have that. And it was new. So you get over that initial shock, and then it's kind of a get down to business. Yeah, that's nice. But now we got shit to do, right?
Yes.
Like there's just kind of this like churn, and then it's a sit back, and it's the fatigue of just living your life in 2020. And what's been really interesting for me, I will say personally, is that never in my life have I seen so much of people's lives, like the integration point. Some people know me from my women in leadership phase or part of my life and passion area, right? But I feel like that and my professional, like how I make money, is merging, because what I talk a lot about when I'm in women in leadership is how do we bring our whole selves to work? Like we're in that experiment now. Everybody's got their whole lives, right? And it is men and women, you know, who are navigating whatever is happening behind the fake green screen, right? Of what's happening and that kind of thing. But like trying to do that while also managing, it's a very human thing, right? Like, I think we're really like recognizing the human in human resources, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's really been, there's like a real cost to that. And Geri, when you talk about like checking in with your staff, I think that the leaders who are doing that kind of like, yes, we have objectives. Yes, we've got code to ship. We've got all of these other pressures, but how are you doing? I think that that's been kind of like a return to basics of remembering that we're all human. But then there's also all those business pressures too, right? That rear their ugly head when you know, Geri, I think you were saying that you had to get some code out really quickly because as a business you had to respond. As human beings you were responding, right, in your own homes, but you're as a business you had to respond too, and that just is like a whole other like cycle of stress too, right?
Yeah. It's both like ship this feature and make sure you have toilet paper at your house.
Yeah.
Right.
Like at the same, and in some cases they're like equally important.
Right.
Seems odd.
Right. Yeah.
How are you two seeing product teams in this case? I mean, Geri, you're literally leading the product teams, and Jen, you're clearly with your clients working with them.
Yeah.
You know, product teams are generally highly resilient and oftentimes used to working this way.
Yeah.
How, you know, Geri, maybe again, kick it off to you just to talk, you know, in terms of your actual product teams, has anything dramatically improved or gotten worse over the last 9 months in terms of how the team's working and maybe even from a morale standpoint?
Yeah, I don't feel like we've had anything get worse.
Yeah.
I would say that there is a I guess what I think is missing is just those conversations that you have because you're there. So there was for a while I had a 15 minutes in the morning with my team because I was like, I just want to check in with you guys, because usually we'd be like getting to our desk and drinking our coffee or whatever and just saying hi. And so there's that, but I think that it has allowed all of us to have a flexibility in how and when we get things done. That's been really, I think, kind of freeing in a way. It's like doing, you know, certain things at certain times of the day that maybe we didn't do before, like, I don't know, taking a walk. That's actually good for you.
Right.
Yeah. And I think too, there were certain points where we would hit a wall, and there was, I remember this time specifically, we had a UX designer start, and she and I had worked together before, so we definitely had a rapport, but it was we were trying to figure out the best way to come up to speed on everything. And we were like, we just want to get together with a whiteboard. And I was like,
God.
you know what? We can do it. We can sit on my deck. I'll order the whiteboards from Amazon. And we booked our meeting based on the 2-day delivery that it would get to my house. And we did. We just sat outside and like did it. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it was a relief. Now we haven't done it since. And I wish we could do that more, but we sort of
now you got a whiteboard out of the deal, so it's all good, right?
So yeah, so I do have a whiteboard now, and we leverage the tool Miro so much because we can see each other working, and the second screen is.
Those tools have been really important. If I had a nickel for every time I went, oh, if only we could whiteboard. Right? But you can. It's just, it forces you to do things differently, right? I mean, it just shifts. It forces you to shift. So, okay. So before I have a question, but before we do that, can we see the results of the poll so we know who's here?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
All right.
We've got a good, lots of leaders, good, some marketing partners, which is good, some product managers, a couple others, which is good to have too, you know, the folks who don't fit in a box. I love you guys, because I would have been in the other two. So okay, thanks for showing that. So so our desire to whiteboard, like that's not going anywhere, right? Let's be honest, pandemic's not going anywhere. All of my clients have extended their work from home through at least through June. Yeah. I mean, most of our now I'm working with some larger clients, so they have some of that flexibility. Geri, I don't know what you guys are planning on doing, you know, kind of formally. I know your offices are still open, so you can go in if a small group needs to be able. No, not even that.
Still can't, not even that. No.
Wow.
Okay. So
we kind of like shut that down. Yeah, that's okay.
So, you know, so the reality is that like that, none of that's going away, right? We're not waking up on January 1st, like bibbity bobbity boo, right? Like it's all over. And yet I'm hearing a lot of things from people a little to that extent, right? Like, well, in 2021, but the reality is Q1 is probably not going to look all that different from Q4 from some of these dynamics we've been talking about. So I guess one of my question is that what do we really think is going to be shaping our work and our lives, and how we're doing both kind of the how we're doing our work, knowing actually that it's probably going to be some of the same things now, but what are the things we're focusing on, or that we're focusing on with clients, or Geri, that you guys have teed up from a product perspective?
Yeah, Geri, go ahead.
You know, as far as what's shaping our work, I think we still do need to talk about the how, like, and get better at it. We've talked about just being better about potentially finding a day where no one has meetings, because we cannot get any focus time because we're always meeting.
Yes.
And we function in jobs where we have to both meet and collaborate and contribute. So really, and that takes a ton of coordination with teams. So specifically around, I'm trying to think of other. Why don't you go, Joe? I'm trying to think of. Yeah.
I mean,
Joe, what are you seeing?
Yeah,
I was thinking of.
I think there's a few things that this is definitely accelerating, right? And Geri, you've lived through this, which is the project to product transformation. I think what you've seen is COVID has only kind of accelerated the need for organizations. And I would say that's not even just in the product organizations, it's also in the marketing teams. So becoming much more agile within your marketing organization or your product or digital organizations, those seem to be accelerating. And I think COVID and the current, circumstances of the world these days certainly are putting pressure on leaders to move faster. And honestly, Jen, you and I spend a lot of time talking about this, doing more with less. I think that is going to continue into next year.
Yeah.
And so hiring becomes really interesting now. Geri, you said something that was so spot on, which is, God, I have to hire someone and I've never even met them, right? Like, what does that look like? Not only from the hiring process and sourcing and finding great talent, but onboarding.
But that onboarding piece,
yeah. How do you build culture in this environment when we're all on Zoom and totally fatigued on Zoom, right? So those are some things I think, and I think the how of working, certainly remote working is not going away anytime soon. And I think maybe, Geri, one other thing I'd say too is the notion of the kind of the 5-day work week, right? The 9 to 5, I think has evaporated for many of these teams. And so now people
for better or for worse,
right? That does bring in different kind of circumstances and different, issues of, really ultimately flexible work, but it also puts the onus on leaders. And we've got a lot of leaders here, so I can't wait to see what they say about trusting in your team and empowering your team, because you're not in the building with them anymore. And so how do you manage and support and guide with giving them autonomy? I think those are just a few things I'm seeing that looking forward into 2021 all have to be accounted for.
I want to jump in and say I was just working with a client who's standing up a new team, right? So it's a global organization and they were spinning up a new team. And they had a significant new presence offshore, right? So in Mumbai. And part of what they did was a sort of a norming exercise. What are our core operating hours, right? It's really hard when you've got people from the East Coast all the way to Mumbai to figure out what your core operating hours are, especially when daylight savings is in there, because, oh my God, my brain just hurt on that. But what was really interesting was they got into conversations about like, what goes in Teams? What are we putting in Teams versus what should be an email? How are we documenting our decisions? This is a product team that has a support function, and how are we making sure that when we do the handoff between US hours to Mumbai hours so that we have 24-hour support, what does a clean handoff look like and things like that? And one of the things I was struck by, that's not normal. I mean, that's a totally normal exercise for a new team. But when we were going through it, all I could think of is like every single one of my clients should be doing this right now if they haven't already, because part of it, what I think we did is in March, right, is we all shifted into this and we said, okay, we good, great. And then because we didn't know, was this going to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, whatever, right? But like to go through a norming exercise like that, even for established teams, I think starts to get at some of that. So what are our core hours? How are we documenting things? Because I've long been an advocate for people, like, people will talk about that they want that agile teams have to be co-located. And I've always sort of went at that because it's not realistic for most companies, especially if you are a global team.
Yep.
And then, especially if you're in a pandemic, you can't be co-located. Like we can no longer rely on this idea of co-location as being the sort of panacea to how we're going to get things done. And so I think that like paying attention, it's like this return to fundamentals, like the baseball team who didn't do well in the playoffs. And so now they're going to go back and they're going to practice their, their ground catches and their pop flies and everything else like that. I think I'm seeing a lot of teams going back to the fundamentals, right? Like sort of how are we going to get a little bit more juice from the squeeze so that we can do more with less? Because maybe we need to hire 4 people, but we can only hire 2. So how are we going to do more with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Geri,
Yeah, I think that's,
yeah.
I think as far as, hiring goes, it's been such a combination and also a juggling act of like what and how to do that. Like in some ways, the economy has been amazing for our hiring.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's coming to an end. We're finding it's making it more difficult now.
Yep.
And really getting people on board is just incredibly challenging without it's like
there's no like how that connection.
Should we just put you in every single meeting every day? But we do things that are I've hosted a couple outside happy hours. We have a standing happy hour every single Thursday that we've been doing now for the whole time. And it's funny because certain people come at certain times and we have like a fairly predictable cadence now. And a significant, well, not as significant, I would say maybe half the team was doing it before. We did start it face to face. And as far as really getting, more juice, for us, it's been, because the world has changed, because we're changing priorities. The hiring plan that my peer and I put together it didn't cover all of the things that I'm doing now. So I really was like, oh, well, this was going to be a junior level team. Nope, not anymore. That needs to be a senior team.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have to run with a whole nother like new product build. And even now, the way that we had envisioned teams aligning to product lines have had to move them under other product managers.
Yep.
Because we just have more breadth.
Yeah.
Our hope was more focus, and it just turned out that we needed more breadth again.
Yep.
with the same number of hires. So we're
Absolutely.
juggling, and now looking forward to 2021, it's like I can see where the revenue goals are for these 2 different things, and I can see where staff are now, and they're not in the right place, but it's going to be another shift and transition forward to get them to where.
Don't you feel like we're all living the Agile Manifesto right now? Like the fact that like how Agile has always been like, so we can pivot with the needs of the business. And we're like, all right,
good luck.
Prove it to me, right? You've been talking about this for years. Now, are you able to do it? And Geri, I think what you've been talking about, and you and I work together on some of this stuff, is that a lot of the investment you've made, right, is now paying off dividends, not just in like the actual, software that gets shipped, but in like the cultural investment that you've made too. Yes. And actually, Chad has asked a question on here about like, how much do you get asked to help other teams on how to successfully run remote teams and collaborate remotely and be the agile, even if it's the small a agile, right? Like the more nimble team, how do you sort of, what's your responsibility outward? And I've definitely seen this. I think that what the pandemic has shown is like all of a sudden, I likened it to you know how we all Marie Kondoed our closets in April and May because we weren't going anywhere, right? We all were like, okay, fine. I'm going to clean out the closet. I'm going to pull out the crawl space. We're going to clean it up because we always have meant to do it, but now we actually have the time. I feel like companies have been doing the same thing. They're like, well, we're not going to make that huge market pivot or that huge investment, but guess what? We're gonna really dig in where we are and we could be better at this. So it's a little bit about what about what Chad asked there about, like, you know, just even the nuts and bolts of how to collaborate remotely, which I think absolutely product teams and engineers have been asked to do. But it's also about like this whole idea of, oh, I think maybe product has some role outside of digital, IT.
Yep.
And can you come help us? And you're like, oh my God, I don't think you know what you're asking, but yes, let's do it.
Ladies, before we go on, let's do our second poll.
Yes, let's do our next poll.
We are going to throw out a second poll. We would love to know from the audience, where would you invest if you're a marketing or a product or a digital leader? Where would you put your time and money for your teams in 2021, knowing what you know now to accelerate growth? Because really, and Jen, you hit this earlier, you still are expected to ship code and you're still expected to drive growth. So we would love to hear from you all. Where would you invest in your teams for 2021 to get the most bang for your buck?
And we'll all play psychics and try to predict what you're going to say and talk about it before we get the results back, right?
Is there a G, all of the above?
Right.
I don't see that.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly. So while we're waiting, while everyone is kind of thinking, if Joe and Jen can kind of share where you guys think we're going to be.
And
be going.
I can go first, Jen, because I think you'll ladder on this. You know, I think we've already hit on a couple things, but investment. I think investing in your current teams and elevation of your current teams is going to be a pretty common theme for certainly a lot of our clients and the enterprise people in the organizations we all know and love, certainly here in Minneapolis, but across the country. I think you're going to find a lot of investment in training and education and trying to level up the people you have, because one, in product, certainly it's very hard. Oh, before I keep going, it looks like, do we have the results? Planning and prioritization.
See, Joe, you and I were going to say training and education, and no one else.
No one else did. That's super. I love that. That's great.
That's okay. It's all right.
Remote and flexible work, and certainly tools and tech, no question about it, are going to be a big result. So that's great.
You know, that planning and prioritization thing, I think that is, so I have long been a big believer that the most important part of product is people, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I talk a lot about the fact that I'm pretty technology agnostic. I don't care what what kind of technology platform you're trying to work with, but like the people and the process around how you're going to bring value with that platform is the stuff that I get really excited about.
Yep.
And so I feel like there's a sort of an underpinning of that training and education, which is both about leveling up, Joe, like you talked about, but sometimes just about leveling.
Yeah, leveling.
Like especially in the Twin Cities, there's a lot of there's like a pedigree of product management. Like when you get a product manager that is done, or a product owner has done that work someplace else, you know, to a certain extent, okay, they came from Target, you know, the flavor they're coming in with, or they came from Best Buy, or they came from Medtronic, or they came from, you know, United Health Group, or any of the kind of the big, you know, the volume players, I should say. I don't mean big in terms of they're the only ones who know how to do product, but they run a lot of volume of talent through those. But what's really interesting then is when you're running a shop that has two Target, a Nerdery, some SPG, SPS, like you've got people from all over. How do you make sure that they're all sort of like on the same page?
Yeah.
And I think that training sometimes is about leveling to get everyone on the same page. And then I think that's part of what goes into that planning and prioritization, because I think what executives see is chaos. Everyone doing their own thing, everyone looking here. And the executives are like, no, guys, you got
no, we got it.
You got to talk to each other, right? Yeah. Like that's the work of product management, is actually talking to other people, that's right? Your business partners, your stakeholders, the people your product impacts, and the people who you are impacted by. So if you work in a, you know, compliance heavy organization, you better be talking to them. If you need data from your COE, you better be talking to them, right? And I think like that prioritization piece is tied to whether or not you have everyone on the same page on what is it, not just what is product management, but what is product management here, right? And Geri, I think you've talked about that too. Like there's product management and then there's dispatch product management, right? That you've really worked hard to define and coalesce and bring everyone along with, right? It's not Geri's dictation, it's what does the team kind of want it to be. I think that's really important in that planning and prioritization piece, don't you?
Oh, it's so important. And when we've been working with third parties, we've had challenges when we haven't been very, very explicit about it, like you're saying, and about silly things, you guys, like not checking in code the right way, and then things are off, and that it's just like, let's
the fundamentals, right?
It is the
basics.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And really, you know, aligning to what really matters is, you know, and I think because we're in this fatigue where we're like doing that, and like you said, like the shifting and the shifting and the shifting, it's just having those baseline process in place helps ground us. And also we can't get too, I guess some of the recent conversations I've been having have been around the agile process and around a product organization. And, you know, dispatch is a young organization. We are, you know, just about 4 years old or a little bit more. And even some of that was, you know, a year ago, I was product, that was it. And now I have, you know, I don't know, 8 people or 9. So, and our team has doubled in the last year. So and we're trying to both run a product that has been around, you know, since our existence, and then do something new. And honestly, there are different needs for those types of work. And I have found most recently that very scrappy, lean, like mindset to really just get it done is so valuable. And not getting stinted in like, well, this is the way that, you know, we have to get from these people and these people and these people, and be absolutely sure, like we just
not quite as dogmatic.
No, we just we don't have the time to do that. So shifting our process because of that, and then getting everyone on board.
Geri, what advice would you give? You know, you obviously have just seen a ton of growth from a talent or a team perspective, and certainly from a revenue and KPI perspective. But what would you tell, you know, anyone watching on the webinar today? What advice would you give them from scaling product teams, you know, right now? What's been really hard and what's been great?
I'm so thankful that we have Confluence built out. When I started, I was like, how does that work? What does that work? And then I'd be like frantically writing it down. And now we actually have, you know, we've been building it as we go, and just having an onboarding plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. I started with a checklist, and then someone started, and I said, hey, can you be the person to update this? Because you just went through it. And I'm certain there are 10 things on there that you did that were awesome that I didn't tell you to do. So put those down. And then they went, another person added, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that knowing that you can iterate in your own onboarding, and then the value there is in just talking through the process. I think Jen, you touched on this, with the whole team, because the value isn't in like, here, go read this. This is how we do things, but rather it's everybody talking about how we do things. So we're just getting that experience across the teams with the different functions. So
and so I think, so we have a question that I want to make sure we answer here. And I think it's related exactly to this, right? This whole idea of like the open communication Is it better or worse, right? With now that we're, in pandemic between employees and leadership. And I do think that that's also another really important connection point on the whole idea of planning and prioritization. Because I actually think that, and Geri, you even talked about it, like it's missing the water cooler conversations is really, I think like that's really hard, especially for leadership, because I think that especially in a larger enterprise, there's an assumption that your conversations are going to trickle down in a certain way, especially if you had a majority of co-located people, right? That you're going to have a conversation in your SLT meeting on a Monday, and by Tuesday, enough of that is going to trickle out in context to the right places that things are going to start to move. And it doesn't happen accidentally. Now it has to happen intentionally.
That's right.
So I think some leaders do really well with that, where they actually are super intentional. I've seen people on Monday mornings on Teams say, here are the things you need to know about this week. Not stuff that's in the backlog or anything else like that, but here are meetings that are happening that are going to impact you. Exactly. And I think those leaders are going to see better outcomes of some of these things where it's the fundamentals that can get missed, right? If down the road, if that kind of, hate to think of it as like trickle down economics, but to a certain extent it is, right?
It is, yeah.
So I think like the question that got asked, I think it totally depends on the leader, but I do think it is also up to leaders of upping the transparency.
Yeah. I was going to ask
you think,
Jen and Geri, so given that, and let's say, what advice would you give a leader to increase that transparency? And I'll give you the reason I asked that. Jim Keane, my amazing and talented co-founder of Fahren, and I were talking, and I realized that during this time, what I thought was kind of my level set 100% of communication, where I normally communicate, I realized was too low. That I actually had to be much more explicit about even just general updates, right? Just what you said, Jen, about key decisions that week or key meetings that week, and nothing tactical necessarily. How would you recommend, Geri, in your own world, whether it's you or a leader above you, or Jen, your clients, how can they increase that communication right now with their product teams or their digital teams, whomever it might be? What are some tactical ways that can help? Anything come to mind?
So I think there's both opportunity to make sure that you're transparent as a leader with the things that you said that relate to, what meetings are happening, what initiatives, just being like really over communicating in that way. And then I also think allowing space for people to be people together. So, and that was like, when I did that workshop, that was the goal. It was just like, can we just spend some time? And now we're spending it on Zoom time, but whatever. Here we are spending it on Zoom time, doing something kind of enjoyable or like as people. So it's kind of both. And it is, and both of them are like an over exaggeration of what we would normally be doing, right, in person. So
Jen, how about you?
Let me answer that. Before I do that though, I do just want to put a call out. Keep the questions coming, because this is really helpful, and we actually are gonna be able to take even more here. So if anyone online has questions, either in the chat or in the Q&A. So one of the things I think about is I've been playing around a lot about this idea of vulnerability, right? And I don't think it's easy for leaders to be vulnerable. It's hard to admit that you don't know. Maybe you're a leader that is new to product, right? Like product was thrust upon you, right? And so like maybe not really even understanding what it means when you say product, or when we say product, right? Like there may be some people like that on the call. There are definitely people like that in the organizations we all work with, right? And one of the ways I think that comes out is this idea of being able to translate business objectives to product objectives. That's not easy to do. And so I'd like to just say that for the people on the call, like it's not easy, okay? To say, we want to grow revenue, or we want to, keep margins at a certain level, or we want to launch into a new market or whatever. Those are business strategies. and your product strategies support that. And there's a ton of different frameworks out there like True North metrics and everything else like that, that help you sort of wind it back.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. Then what's the work that has to be done to drive the results that are going to get us to that business objective? But that is not easy to do. And so I think to this idea of communication, one of the things that I think leaders could do more of, I'm going to start with the leaders and then I'm going to come back around to the product managers because I got work for you too. But for the leaders to say, here's what we have to get done. We as a team, right? We as a company, and this is what we're trying to get done. So how can your product support that? And not assuming that you know it and maybe being okay if you don't. So that's the one thing on the leader side. And then on the product manager side is if you're getting direction from your leadership about these are our business objectives and you can't make the connection between your product and the business objectives, being vulnerable enough to say, look, I'm not sure I know what the connection is here. Can we talk about that?
Yep.
I think it's really hard for people to do it because what if somebody says, you know, you're right, let's go, right? Like, I mean, that can be scary, but it's probably a fairly low risk. Instead to say, I want to be really intentional here about connecting those company objectives to my product objectives so I know that I'm working on the right things. That requires a ton of vulnerability on both sides. And I don't think corporate America, generally speaking, is real good with vulnerability. So like, I feel like that is like the next thing that we've got to get to is being able to say, hey, I'm not sure I understand how you connect to me and me connect to you. So let's talk about it and let's figure it out.
Yep.
Is scary, but I think really has to happen in a lot of companies at both levels.
The human. Oh, go ahead, Geri. I apologize. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and it's really okay to put something out there and then iterate on it.
Like, this is imperfect.
Also
it's going to get us there. Right. Yeah.
Also very scary, Geri, to put something out there and iterate upon it for leaders often. That expect fully baked solutions going to market. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think
which is such a tension between. I think that I feel less of that tension because my org is very small, even though it's still a real tension. But as things get bigger and the layers get more, it gets even bigger. And for our, and maybe you were going to get here, Jen, but this was all making me think of, you know, I used to sit with the founders and decide what we would work on.
Right.
Like it was that simple.
Right.
And now there are the founders and then me and PMs and POs, and all of that happened in a matter of, you know, not even 6 months. So then like extrapolating out who does what, where, when, and like is a little bonkers. So
do either of you find that there's a, you know, I know we're coming up towards the end here and we'll do some Q&A pretty quickly, but Jen, in your experience working with clients, or Geri within Dispatch or your previous work, you know, obviously OKRs are an easy example, and I don't really care about the framework per se, but do you feel that clients that implement some type of system that kind of drives traceability from organizational goals down to the product team goals, does that generally have a positive impact on those teams as you've seen it, or does it cause more problems than it solves? What do you think? Jen, I love the smile on your face right now.
I have an opinion.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Like, I always believe that goal-oriented and data-driven companies are always going to outperform those who are just wandering around in the dark. So that's my first thing. So I'm not, so I want that context. I want that stipulated before I say what comes next. I think companies typically are really good with the top level. And then they've got a bunch of data down here. And they've got like more data than they know what to do with. They got data for days, years, months. And what's missing in the middle is the insight and how those insights drive those outcomes. Like there's no mapping. There's the lake, right? And there's the mountaintop, and there's no sense of what is between those two. Right? Or how they connect up, or what the path is from one to another. And so I also think like that's a role for product managers to be able to manage up, right? I always tell people to say, you know, if you're writing, you know, you're creating your product roadmap and your objectives for the year, and you don't know how you connect, you can come and say, look, here's all the things I can tell you. I think what you're trying to do is, increase self-service so that we can keep our costs down. But like, maybe you've got something else you want me to work on, because what you tell me that connection point is will dictate what I'm going to build, right? Like in my mind, it's so like one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
But because people are coming at it from two different angles, I think it's very hard. So that's my opinion.
Geri, have you implemented anything to drive that planning? We saw from our poll, planning and prioritization was one of the areas to invest. Is there any key insights you've got from dispatch or your previous work about that planning and prioritization, knowing where we are now and heading into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, in our case, it feels like we're just like always trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
And get organized enough to like both execute and plan ahead. And we're starting to strike that balance through defining the metrics that Jen was referring to. And it is hard, or it has been hard in our case even, to just make that connection between revenue and then breaking it down so that we are looking at things that are going to lead so that we're not like, wait a second, where the heck is revenue? Like we could have been looking at these other things well before that, right? And defining what those are. So yes, we have been doing that work. And then so for us, it's been doing that work, but then aligning all of these new people so that we can start even thinking out further.
Yeah.
So that we're defining those things for the next year and kind of
not just the next sprint, right?
Not just the next sprint.
Yep.
Certainly.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Versus reactive.
Yeah.
That's great. This discussion has been amazing, ladies. I've got two more questions. Or Jen, I think you've got a question. I know I've got a question, and a call out to the audience. If anyone else has any questions for Geri or Jen or myself, throw them in the Q&A, and we would love to tackle those. I've got one maybe that
you go, Joe.
Yeah, perfect. So I kind of always love the questions about the messy side about being a product leader. And I know both of you understand
Isn't it
this.
all messy? I mean,
come on. It mostly is. I'll give you, and I'm being selfish here for a current a client of ours, but what are ways, and Geri and Jen, I think you're going to have different ideas, but probably a same kind of ethos on this, which is, how do you help either your clients, Jen, or dispatch, Geri, get closer to customers? It seems like this is still such a problem in 2020, and probably is exacerbated by 2020, about actually talking to real life live customers and having your product managers and your product owners talking to actual customers. That still seems like a huge problem for even the largest and the best companies in the world at times that we all know and work at. How do you two feel about, like, how can you guys create the scenario where being customer obsessed or customer centric can happen? How do you enable that? Or what are some of the things you've done in the past to help clients get closer to their customers?
You want me to start?
Go ahead, Geri.
Well, this is making me think of, so we're doing some development in a beta, and have been working with a company and have honestly had great success partnering with them.
Awesome.
And really wanting to understand how they do what they do, and we had one of our main users like create a video of how he does what he does. And it has been so instrumental in our work, but also we shared it at our company meeting.
Yep.
And it was like mind blowing for sales, for everyone to just have this empathy for our user. So I just think, like, if you can just get one, like, it's really powerful. If it's recorded, and you tell it in a story format, maybe, I mean, this does not need to be long, It's just, yeah, it's really powerful for just everyone, not
Yeah.
just
So
the
share those
folks
customer
building.
stories broader.
I like
than
that.
Yes.
the
It's
teams.
like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be fancy, right?
No.
Like,
No.
This is just like,
No.
like you just have to do it. It doesn't have
Yep.
to be fancy, I think is the
Mhm.
big thing. Because I think like somehow we've worked ourselves into this feeling that like every time you talk to a customer, it has to be, you know, behind a two-way mirror where you're watching them, or, you know, or where you're watching them, you know, or you're part of some big, you know, ethnographic something or another, and it has to cost $30,000 at minimum or it doesn't count. And I think like that's a real dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I even sometimes though think companies have to go upstream, and the number of people who can't even really say who their customers are would blow your mind.
Terrifying. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, like, I don't mean it, like, if that's where you are, like, own it, and then let's talk about it, right?
Yep.
Like, don't hide that you don't know, or you don't know how to identify them or find them or interact with them.
Mhm. Yeah,
But
and
like, especially for like internal, like product teams that serve internal, like they forget that their customers are their employee friends, right? Their colleagues. Like, they're like, well, I don't have customers. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Who's using your stuff?
That's
you know,
right.
you do
Yeah.
have customers.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
and you can find a proxy, right?
You
Like
can.
if you absolutely cannot find a customer, then
Yes.
talk to the people who talk to the customers all day long and take calls.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Or,
The
you
example
know,
I always
there
had
are
of that
people.
was that when I worked at Children's Hospital, you know who the single best person was to ask about what the problems of families were? The front desk, the information desk, because they got everything.
Yeah.
They got, I don't know how to
They
pay
had
for
to route
parking,
it.
to I don't know where my doctor is,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
I need, do you have any information about, you know, XYZ condition? Like they got everything.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And we spent
Right.
2 hours with them, and we probably got as much as we would have gotten out of 50 focus groups.
Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
Now that didn't say that we didn't then also have to have the focus groups and talk to actual families, but like low hanging fruit, let's talk to that guy. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, and I'll give a shout out to one of my favorite companies and nonprofits here in the Twin Cities, which is Caring Bridge, a past client of mine and I love the company. They do incredible work in the healthcare space for people going through healthcare journeys. And they did do something that I thought was amazing, and I would recommend it for everyone, which is they did form a little kind of user beta group, right? A group of customers or users in this case of their platform that even leadership was comfortable going with less than fully baked ideas or beta software. It would be the early rollout group. And it was great to see the feedback you'd get because you could smooth over 90% of the problems before you launched it to the full market. And it was not complicated. It was not expensive. It was not sitting behind two-way glass, but it was setting up 10 people that you could share a beta product with and just say, hey, is this something you'd like? So it doesn't have to be complicated. I think Jen
you know what I like about that too, Joe, is like, that's customer feedback as validation on what you built, right?
Yep.
There's also customer input into what should you build?
What should you build? You bet.
And I think that there's companies out there that do one and not the other.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there's companies that don't do either, but like you kind of have to have both, because you have to go back and say, so like Geri, in the example you gave with your client, like there's that intake idea, right? Of like, what should we build? What is important? What's going to drive the most value? And then you need your team to go off and do what they're great at, which is design great interfaces, build scalable stuff. And then before you put it out to the world, maybe you should show it to that person again, or that a similar kind of person, and say, this is what we were trying to do. Did we do it?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And those things can happen Wizard of Oz style with a prototype. It doesn't need to be like, it can be very, very quick and
Post-it notes.
Short.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sharpie.
Short. Yep.
Yeah, I think maybe demystifying it is really important. Like bringing it down from the like ivory tower research kind of thing to like really just being able to say, what's the easiest way, the quickest way, the lowest risk way we can get this information, and being able to like create those pathways, I think is really good.
Yep.
Okay, so we're about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Are there any other questions from the participants? Otherwise, we'll just keep talking.
Well, Jen, I know you had a question too, and I wanted to hit on that. Getting product into other areas.
Yes.
And that's a much longer than a 5 minute.
It is. That's more than 5 minutes. But like, so Geri, I'm kind of curious. I know that you're, you just talked about like your sales team getting kind of pulled into the product way of thinking, right? And I know you've got that, Joe, I know with other customers. Have you guys started to see product come out of IT and digital and like start to have impact in other parts of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Geri, I'll let you go first.
I was going to say, I think that because of where we're at, we are constantly like working with parts of the business and uncovering and defining processes and building them as, you know, it's like, oh, how do you guys do this? Oh, well, you know, Joe does it with a whiteboard and et cetera. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. And then you're like trying to figure out what it looks like. So in many cases, we're building it with them. So we're defining the requirements and they're like, oh, wow, that is the way we do it. Should we do it that way? Does it need to? So there's sort of, I think, the way that we think about things and gather information that helps. And certainly with the research, I said with the person that was in our meeting, I think that it just provoked everyone to think more about the customer and how they might engage with them and the problems that we're solving. So yeah, that's where I would leave it.
Yeah. Joe, anything else?
You know, I would say the marketing organization product thinking is definitely in many organizations already there, but if it's not, it's going to quickly be. You know, agile marketing with little a as the agile, right? Like, but just how do we become more data driven in our marketing? How do we iterate? How do we improve cycle after cycle? I think that's the easy next step. I think where it gets really hard for companies is particularly HR and finance. And I'll throw legal and compliance in there as well. All in that vein. It's those ancillary teams that are vital to an organization, but that don't maybe either necessarily have direct consumer facing capabilities. It just seems like it's really hard in particular for HR and finance organizations to kind of adopt that product mindset, but they're going to be forced to. So a lot of, Jen, what you and I talk about, product, you know, project to product transformation and funding product teams and not projects. That seems to be a major hurdle for a lot of organizations to get over. It's not working in sprints, or it's not working in agile for the digital teams. It's the rest of the organization coming around it and supporting it.
I agree. And you know what, though, like just earlier today, I just had a conversation and I said the words, you know, not everything has to be run by product, right? Sometimes a finance and compliance team needs to be run in a really regimented waterfall manner and project management, and let's project manage the hell out of it and make sure we get it right. So sometimes we have to make that choice. But I do think, though, that one of the ways that I think is really interesting from HR is, if I want to loop it back, and I know we're at time, almost at time here, so I'll bring it full circle. But, you know, we talked at the beginning a lot about leveling up from training and things like that. I think that the biggest way that we can start to bring our HR partners, our human capital partners in, is by helping them understand how we work differently and what does that mean from our recruitment standpoint, because it's almost like a do as you teach as you go. So Geri, you were talking about, like, you know, as you sit down with those business partners, they are learning product while you're doing product to them, right? And they're starting to see that, oh, I understand how this kind of goes, right? Like this kind of incremental sense. So I think like that's also like starting to bring your human capital partners in to say, you need to understand how we work so that you can help us find really good talent. And oh, by the way, while you're watching us, maybe there's some things that we could help you with in terms of how you run your part of the business that fit the product model. And I think like that, like I like to sort of lure people in that way. But anyways, I know we're at time.
We are at time. Ladies, great conversation. I mean,
Agreed.
honestly, the three of us
Mm-hmm.
could easily talk for another hour on this.
Probably.
We've often do.
Well,
But thank you again for joining the folks on the webinar. Thank you for being a part of this. Great questions. We hope this helps in even some small way as we turn the corner and try to go for the win, as we said in our title, and take 2021 by the straps and go get it. So with that said, Geri, Jen, thank you again. And for those on the phone, thanks for joining. We will see you all shortly. Take care.
that's good. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Goodbye.